Hey everyone, my name is Liam Smith. Today, I'm going to be telling you 3 disturbing, true, scary stories. But before I get started, I want to warn you. These stories are not for the faint of heart. They're dark, they're disturbing, and they're sure to leave you feeling a little uneasy. So if you're ready for a good scare, then grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and let's get started. Story number 1. The Whispering House. The old house stood on a hill, overlooking the town. It had been empty for years, and rumors swirled around it like the mist that often shrouded it. Some said it was haunted by the ghosts of its former occupants who had died mysteriously. Others said it was a portal to another world, a place where the laws of nature didn't apply. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the house. They had heard the stories, but they didn't believe them. They thought it would be fun to spend a night in the old house and see if anything happened. The teenagers arrived at the house late at night. The moon was full, and its light cast eerie shadows on the house and the surrounding trees. The teenagers used flashlights to make their way up the front steps and to the front door. The door was unlocked, so they pushed it open and stepped inside. The house was dark and dusty. The teenagers could hear their own footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. They explored the house room by room, finding nothing but old furniture and cobwebs. Finally, they came to the attic. The attic was dark and cramped, with only a few small windows. The teenagers used their flashlights to look around. They saw old trunks and boxes covered in dust. One of the teenagers, a boy named Alex, found a trunk in the corner of the attic. He opened the trunk and found a stack of old books inside. He picked up one of the books and opened it. The book was filled with strange symbols and writing. "What is this?" Alex asked. "I don't know," one of the other teenagers, a girl named Sarah, said. "But it looks creepy." Alex started to read from the book. The words were in a language that he didn't understand, but he felt a chill run down his spine as he read them. Suddenly, the attic door slammed shut. The teenagers were trapped. "What happened?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Alex said, "but I think we should get out of here." The teenagers tried to open the attic door, but it was locked. They started to panic. "We're trapped!" one of the other teenagers, a boy named Ben, shouted. Alex picked up the book again. He didn't know what else to do. He started to read from the book again. As he read, the symbols in the book began to glow. The teenagers watched in amazement as the symbols floated into the air and formed a strange portal. Alex hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the portal. The other teenagers followed him. The teenagers found themselves in a dark and foggy forest. They could hear strange noises all around them. "What is this place?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Alex said, "but it doesn't look like anywhere on Earth." The teenagers started to walk through the forest. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew they had to find a way out. After a while, they came to a clearing in the forest. In the middle of the clearing was a house. The house was old and dilapidated, but it was the only sign of civilization they had seen so far. The teenagers decided to approach the house. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. They tried the doorknob, and the door opened. The teenagers stepped inside the house. The house was dark and dusty, just like the old house on the hill. They could hear their own footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. They explored the house room by room, but they found no one. The house was completely empty. Finally, they came to the basement. The basement was dark and damp. The teenagers could hear strange noises coming from the darkness. "Should we go down there?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Alex said, "but it might be the only way to find a way out of here." Alex and the other teenagers started to walk down the stairs to the basement. As they got closer, they could hear the noises more clearly. The noises were whispers. "Who's there?" Alex called out, but there was no answer. The teenagers reached the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The basement was dark and damp, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. The teenagers could see several shadowy figures moving in the darkness. "What are those things?" Sarah asked. I don't know. The teenagers stood there, frozen in fear. The shadowy figures were getting closer. We have to get out of here, Alex said. The teenagers turned and ran back up the stairs, but the shadowy figures were faster. They chased the teenagers up the stairs and into the house. The teenagers ran through the house, trying to find a way out, but the shadowy figures were always behind them. Finally, the teenagers came to the attic door. They burst through the door and slammed it shut behind them. The teenagers huddled together in the corner of the attic, too scared to move. They could hear the shadowy figures banging on the attic door. What are we going to do? Sarah asked. I don't know, Alex said, but we have to do something. Alex looked around the attic. He saw the book that he had found in the trunk. He picked up the book and opened it. We have to use the portal, Alex said. It's the only way to escape. The other teenagers nodded in agreement. Alex started to read from the book. The symbols in the book began to glow again. The teenagers watched in amazement as the symbols floated into the air and formed a portal. Alex stepped into the portal. The other teenagers followed him. The teenagers found themselves back in the attic of the old house on the hill. They burst through the attic door and ran out of the house. The teenagers ran down the hill and out of the town. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of their own homes. The teenagers never spoke of what they had seen in the other world, but they knew that they would never forget the night they were trapped in the Whispering House. Many years later, Alex was walking through the town when he saw the old house on the hill. He stopped to look at it. The house was still abandoned, and it still looked eerie. Alex remembered the night he and his friends were trapped in the house. He remembered the shadowy figures and the whispers. He remembered the portal to the other world. Story number 2, The Haunted Walmart. William John was a hard-working man. He worked the night shift at Walmart to support his family. He was a kind and gentle soul, but he also had a strong sense of duty. He knew that he had to provide for his family, no matter what. One night, William was working in the electronics section when he heard a strange noise. It was a low, moaning sound coming from somewhere in the back of the store. William was curious, but also a little bit scared. He had never heard anything like it before. William decided to investigate. He slowly made his way to the back of the store, following the sound. As he got closer, the moaning grew louder. He could hear it echoing through the empty aisles. William finally reached the back of the store. He found himself in a large storage room. The room was dark and dusty, and the only light came from a few flickering fluorescent bulbs. William could see that the moaning was coming from a stack of boxes in the corner of the room. He slowly approached the boxes, his heart pounding in his chest. As he got closer, he could see that the boxes were moving. William gasped in horror. The boxes were being pushed apart by a pair of pale, bony hands. The hands emerged from the boxes, followed by a twisted, emaciated figure. The figure was a woman, but she was hardly recognizable as human. Her skin was pale and translucent, and her eyes were sunken and hollow. Her long, matted hair hung down over her face, obscuring her features. The woman opened her mouth and let out a blood-curdling scream. William stumbled back in fear. He turned and ran, but the woman was faster. She lunged at him, her bony fingers clawing at his face. William tried to fight her off, but she was too strong. She overpowered him and pinned him to the ground. She raised her hand to deliver the killing blow, but then she stopped. The woman stared down at William with her empty eyes. She seemed to be hesitant. For a moment, William thought he had a chance, but then the woman smiled. It was a cold, cruel smile. The woman brought her hand down, and William felt a sharp pain in his chest. He looked down and saw that she had plunged her fingers into his heart. William screamed in agony, but the woman didn't move. She just stared at him with her empty eyes. William's vision began to blur. He could feel his life slipping away. He tried to say his goodbyes, but no words came out. He closed his eyes and waited for the end. When William opened his eyes again, he was lying on the floor of the storage room. He was alone. He sat up and looked around, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. William got to his feet and brushed himself off. He didn't know what had just happened, but he was grateful to be alive. He turned and walked back to the electronics section, determined to finish his shift. But as he walked, William couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He felt like he was being watched. He turned around, but there was no one there. William continued on his way, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He glanced over his shoulder again, and this time he saw it. The woman was standing in the shadows, watching him. She smiled at her cold, cruel smile, and then she disappeared. William ran. He ran as fast as he could, but the woman was always there, just out of reach. He ran until he reached the front of the store and burst through the doors. William ran into the night, never to be seen again. The truth is, William was never seen again, but that doesn't mean he disappeared into thin air. Some say that he's still out there, running from the woman in the shadows. Others say that he's been taken to her domain, a place where nightmares come to life. But whatever happened to William John, one thing is for sure: he is never coming back. And the woman in the shadows? She is still out there watching, waiting for her next victim. Story number 3, November Night. In the heart of New York, where the lights never sleep, there lurks a dark secret. Michael Joseph Brown was a young man with a bright future ahead of him. He had just graduated from college and landed his dream job in Manhattan. One night, after a long day at work, Michael decided to drive home to Queens. The November night was cold and crisp, and the streets were deserted. Michael rolled down the windows of his car and enjoyed the feeling of the cool air on his face. He was humming to himself as he drove, feeling content with his life. But then, without warning, Michael's car suddenly died. He pulled over to the side of the road and tried to start the engine, but it was no use. The car was completely dead. Michael sighed in frustration. He was stuck in the middle of nowhere on a cold and lonely night. He looked around, but there was no one else in sight. Michael got out of his car and tried to flag down a passing car, but no one stopped. He was starting to get worried. He was all alone in the middle of the night with no way to get home. Michael decided to walk to the nearest gas station. He figured he could call a tow truck from there. He started walking down the deserted road, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As Michael walked, he began to feel uneasy. The trees on either side of the road seemed to be closing in on him, and the shadows seemed to be moving. Michael quickened his pace, but the feeling of dread only grew stronger. Suddenly, Michael heard a noise behind him. He turned around, but there was nothing there. He told himself that he was just imagining things, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Michael continued walking, but he kept glancing over his shoulder. He was starting to feel paranoid. He imagined that he could see figures lurking in the shadows, following him. Michael finally reached the gas station. He rushed inside and asked the attendant to call a tow truck. The attendant gave Michael a strange look, but he agreed to call. Michael waited at the gas station for what felt like an eternity. He was shivering from the cold, and his nerves were frayed. He kept glancing out the window, but he didn't see any sign of the tow truck. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Michael saw the tow truck pull up. He sighed with relief. He was finally going to be able to get home. Michael got into the tow truck and the driver took off. Michael looked out the window as they drove away, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Michael got home safely, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that he had experienced that night. He knew that something strange had happened, but he couldn't explain it. Michael never went back to that road again, but sometimes, on cold and lonely nights, he still thinks about the figures that he saw in the shadows and the feeling that he was being watched. Michael Joseph Brown never forgot the night that his car died on a deserted road in the heart of New York. He never went back to that road again, but he often thought about the figures that he saw in the shadows and the feeling that he was being watched. Well, there you have it. 3 disturbing, true, scary stories. I hope you enjoyed them, even if they did give you a little nightmare or two. If you liked these stories, Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more horror content. And if you have any disturbing, true, scary stories of your own, feel free to share them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.